Welcome to Complex Kids Simple Solutions, the podcast for parents raising complex and neurodivergent kids who are doing their best in systems that don't always make things easy. I'm Michelle Shoaidi, founder of Special Education Concierge, a mom to a complex kid, a speaker, and an advocate. This space isn't about perfection. It's about real life, the hard days, the small wins, the moments where you wonder if you're doing enough, and the moments where you realize you are. Here we talk honestly, share practical insight, and simplify what feels overwhelming. One conversation at a time. You are your child's hero. Welcome to Complex Kids Simple Solutions. Today's guest is Edwin Egelsee, and he is a special education attorney with over 2 decades of experience fighting for the rights of children with disabilities. Edwin started his journey working hands-on with kids with autism, Down syndrome, ADHD, and other learning differences. And that experience lit a fire in him to pursue a career protecting their legal rights. He's represented families at IEP meetings, mediations, due process hearings, and even state and federal courts. He's also a fluent Spanish speaker who is deeply passionate about serving Spanish-speaking families. Edwin, welcome to Complex Kids Simple Solutions. If parenting feels heavier than you expected, if the questions keep coming and the answers feel unclear, or if you're carrying more than most people see, welcome. This is Complex Kids Simple Solutions, a podcast for parents raising complex and neurodivergent kids who want clarity, confidence, and support that actually makes sense. I'm Michelle Shoaidi, founder of Special Education Concierge, formerly known as Wisdom for Complex Kids, a speaker, an advocate, a mom who lives this life, and someone who helps parents navigate it. No labels required, no perfect parenting expected, just real conversations, practical perspective, and reminders that you're not alone. Let's get into today's episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Complex Kids Simple Solutions. Today we have Edwin Egelsee, and I absolutely am so excited to introduce him to you because he was actually Drake's attorney when we went to due process. So, Edwin, thank you so much for being on the show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yes. So I'll just tell you really quick because we were in a tight spot with Drake and we needed somebody to kind of help us, and he was amazing. So I want to put it out there. I have sent many people to him. So he's an amazing attorney, special education attorney. So if this is something that you're looking for, just we will put all of his information on the notes and you can reach out to him. But let's get to the fun stuff. All right. So, I have never had an attorney on the show, and okay. I don't know if it was because I haven't thought about it or if it was because it's hard to get you guys to sit down and actually, because you're so busy. So thank you for coming. But
well, I hope you just don't bore your audience. So hopefully it's somewhat entertaining and informative. So
for sure. I think that there's nothing boring about talking about our kids, right? Mm-hmm. Especially when it comes to special education. This is something that I really have taken into my heart to make sure that my son gets the best special education that he can get. And really with all the other kids out there, they deserve this. It's their right. And this is how it needs to be. So that's why we have people like you. Okay. So, I think that there's a couple of things that I really wanted to ask you, and we kind of talked about this a little bit. So, I think that bringing an attorney in to answer these questions makes so much sense because us parents that we really don't know. We really don't understand a lot about this. So I think that the first thing is, what are the most important legal rights that parents have, actually the kids have under IDEA, that parents don't even know about? Like, can you tell us about a little bit about those?
Yeah, I it would take hours to explain all
Yes.
your rights, which I always thought was interesting in an IEP. You go in, you start it, and then they give you this booklet of rights. And then they don't give you any time to review them or anything. They said, well, do you have any questions? And of course, you're not going to have any questions because you don't know the rights because you haven't reviewed them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I would advise, because with every IEP that is scheduled, school districts usually send those rights to parents. Don't just throw them away or use them as placemats or anything like that. Actually read them, because they are condensed in a way so that you could use them. Unless you know your rights, you're not going to be able to exercise them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if I was to choose something just to talk to the parents, because with IEPs, it's an interesting process, especially prior to the pandemic when things were in person. I always thought that there was just a psychological edge to IEPs, in
Mm-hmm.
that there's a room with a team of professionals and they're all around a table and there's one chair for the parent to come in. So it is a daunting process, somewhat intimidating. Okay, that's a lesson with the virtual format. But the right that I wanted to emphasize is that the law is clear. The IDEA is clear that parents should actively participate in an IEP. In other words, that the school district has to create an environment where there's meaningful participation. So in other words, the most important person is the parent. I know it doesn't feel that way all the time, and in
Mm-hmm.
terms of decision making, but the parent should have active involvement. They shouldn't be just some passive person that says, yes, sure, let me sign on the dotted line. They need to be able to assert rights. So a couple of tidbits is, number one, always audio record the IEPs. I think that's the best evidence of what was discussed, decisions that were made. This kind of information doesn't wind up in the IEP notes, unfortunately, all the time. All you
Mm-hmm.
have to do is written notice 24 hours before the IEP, your intent to audio tape. I always tell clients, go ahead and just make a note when you're accepting the IEP on the IEP notice, so that it's clear that you're going to audio tape.
Mm-hmm.
Also, come prepared. Review the other the former IEP. Know your son's or daughter's present levels of performance, so that you know what kind of goals that you're looking for. Have a list of that.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing your rights in that sense, in the process, allows you to be able to actively participate. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
know the process and you're just going in cold, it's going to be tough, because all you could do is accept or reject and not even know why you're rejecting, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I would just, preparation is
Mm-hmm.
probably the biggest thing for an IEP, but also um, just know those rights, so that if you're feeling that they're being violated, you'll know.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I did not know before, so we started pretty young with Drake. He was
Mhm.
3, right? He had come from the regional center here in California. It's called the regional center, and then you go into the school district, and that's how it is in the rest of the country. At 3 you go into the school district, and the school district starts taking care of all the educational plans for the kids. But when we came in at 3, I was that parent that had no idea what what is an IEP? Like, what are we trying to do here? And then, you start learning, like, you go, okay, well, they're telling me these things. Okay, well, they must know what they're talking about. They
Sure.
must know what it is that they are, offering. And so parents just kind of go along with it. And one thing that I learned a little bit later was that you can actually bring somebody. to the IEP with you. You can invite a person. If it is, their speech therapist or their occupational therapist or just a friend to hold your hand. So you're not, just you as a parent, you have the right to bring somebody to the IEP
Right.
table with you. And I think that made that daunting. And I'm still, we were from the time when we met in person. um it makes it a little bit easier to deal with when you have somebody there with you. So I appreciate that we have to be prepared, and just so they know that you can also bring somebody in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I When I brought you in, it was like I don't have to say anything. So it was great. As a parent, I was like, you know what? He's going to be prepared. So this is a good way of doing this. I think that another thing that sometimes parents don't pick up on are the red flags, because we don't know those signs. We don't
Yeah.
recognize the signs. So, can you go over a little bit of those red flags with us?
Sure. There's lots of red flags. I think that the number one is I think that parents just, I have two daughters, and
Mm-hmm.
we become experts of our own kids. We know when, what's making them tick for the most part. Or sure that, there's other things that we may not know. But, if we're not seeing progress, if you're
Mm-hmm.
going to IEP meetings and they're like, the team is saying there's substantial progress, they're meeting their goals, but you're just seeing, your child doing figure eights. They're going to school, but they're not making any progress. There's no movement. That is the first red flag, that something is missing. Something's not manifesting in other environments. Because it could be that at school they are performing in a certain way, but if the child's not generalizing all those skills in other environments, then it really isn't learned. It's in the
Mm-hmm.
moment when they're looking to see whether they're meeting their goals and objectives. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so the first thing is just keep aware of, how are they reading, how are they writing, how are they socializing, how are they speaking, all
Mm-hmm.
those things, because an IEP should be addressing all of that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and this is very general, but whenever I hear the word functional, red flags go up, because if you're arguing, and it's happened to me many times, we're not seeing this progress, but the student's at his or her functional level, whatever that means. The way that I interpret it is they're putting a ceiling on the student. In other words, this is how
Mm-hmm.
far they're going to go, and functionally they're doing well. So what do you want? And
Mm-hmm.
so that term kind of makes me go, okay, let me make sure that we are not missing something. When goals become functional, it means that academics have taken, back burner, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and that we're just teaching the student to kind of be as independently functional as possible. Again, these are terms that are used that have this universal thought. That, again, I go, what do you mean by that? When you're saying that word, what specific skills are being worked on? What specific skills are, are they learning? It's not okay just to give me that buzzword and let's move on. So
Mm-hmm.
those are just two things that, are just red flags to look for when
Mm-hmm.
you're advocating for your child.
Yeah. No, for sure. We went through this. It was, oh, he's functioning at this level, and it really truly is. I just I was talking to an occupational therapist a little bit earlier today, and the talking about how do you get the kids to get more into it's about functional, but it was more like we cannot just allow them to be in one level
Sure.
and be okay with that. Part of it is, there's got to be growth. There's got to be, that's looking at those progress reports and looking at what they're saying. Oh, if they're saying, just sometimes, they'll just say, oh, it's delightful to have so and so in our classroom.
They're cute.
And yes, and then it's like, okay, well, yeah, it's great, I'm so glad, and then it
Yeah.
makes the parents happy. But then what is it that's really happening?
Yeah.
What is it?
And you
So
know, and you're bringing up a good point. Conclusions are one thing, but I want to see the data. If they're telling me that the student is reading at a certain level, writing at a certain level, um, doing things, I want to know what they relied on to draw those conclusions. It's not
mhm,
okay just to say, well, look, this is occurring, and
mhm,
it's not okay just to say at their functional level. I don't think so. I think, that the landmark in anything that we do, we want to grow and keep expanding and doing these things. The minute we start to draw certain limits on students
mhm,
and use things like, well, cognitively, that's all they could do. Behaviorally, that's all they could do,
mhm,
is we're
mhm,
putting the ceiling on top of them when the whole cornerstone of the IDEA is progress, ultimately to be as independent
mhm,
as you can be as an adult. When we're in the thick of the IEP process, we got to
mhm,
take a step back and go, we got all these goals and objectives. We got all this data. We have these meetings. We have these documents. We have all this. What's it for? Well,
mhm,
ultimately, it's for the student to progress to so that once they are either graduated 18 or go through the functional program or the adult program rather
mhm,
to 22, are they ready for post high school life? The whole
mhm,
purpose is to make the student as independent as possible so they have the best life possible.
mhm,
So if as we're going through grade school, middle school, high school, and we're not meeting those benchmarks, those life benchmarks,
mhm.
then what is it for? So,
Yes.
you could go to all these meetings and say progress, that we love having them. They're a blessing in the classroom, which are all good things. I don't want to
Mhm.
discount any of those things. But
Sure.
in the end, if the student isn't learning in such a manner that we could go in another environment in the community, and they're actually utilizing these skills, then really what is it for?
Yeah,
So
for
taking a
sure.
step back and looking at the big picture is always a good thing, because when you're in the throes of the IEP process, you kind of get lost in the woods there, and you really want to go, wait a minute, what's the bigger picture here?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that this kind of leads a little bit into the next question that I was going to ask you. And it talks about, right, yeah, like how do you, like, what do you do when you start seeing these progress reports that are just, it's a delight to have him here.
Yeah,
That usually means that something is off with the IEP. They're probably either not following the IEP, or the goals are not necessarily individualized for that child.
yeah.
So what can the parents do when you start seeing that the IEP is not quite being followed, and that you find out that they're not getting enough, speech therapy like they were supposed to? What do you do? What can you do as a parent?
Yeah, that's a good question, and this is where being a conscientious parent is ideal,
Mm-hmm.
because you can take the position that, well, they're the educators, it's up to them, and sure, that is a position to take. And I'm not talking about right or wrong or good or bad. It's just what kind of advocacy you want to do. But if you don't know where your child functions, where they read, how
Mm-hmm.
do they write, all these skills. If you don't know, then if I say, look, in a year from now, we're going to target this area, and right now, this is where they're at. In a year from now, this is where we want them to be. Do you agree? Now, if you don't know where the current benchmark is, then your opinion as to if in a year from now that is good progress, you're not going to be able to answer that. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
the first thing that I would advise parents is become an expert educationally of your child. Know all areas of need. So when you receive the draft IEP, and I say draft because I'm going to advise parents always ask for the draft prior to
Mm-hmm.
the IEP, so at least you could get an idea of where they're going. But you're
Mm-hmm.
going to get an idea of how they see your child in all those areas: academics, communication, social emotionally, behavior, adaptive skills. You're going to see where at that given time, this is where we're seeing how your child functions in the classroom. Okay. And then you could take an inventory yourself and say, well, I don't see that, or I do see that. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
if you agree, you go, okay, I agree that in this given time, this is where the student is. In a year from now, what's our target? Because those are the goals and objectives. Those are
Mm-hmm.
the areas that we
Yes.
want to focus. So when we're back here in a year, are we seeing that progress or are we not? And a
Mm-hmm.
good question is, how do you know, district? You're saying, when we get to the IEP, there's little boxes: met, substantial progress, unmet. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Those are conclusions. I want to know, how did you get there? How did you,
Mm-hmm.
so what data did you use to get there? How do you
Mm-hmm.
collect the data? Walk me through the process so that I understand when you're getting ready for this meeting, what kind of process underlies you to say, well, this is where the student is, and I stand by it. I know, I tested them. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay for
Mm-hmm.
parents to ask how you got there and to know where your student is. And so then you could say, well, no, I want him progressing to this level because I know he could do this.
Mm-hmm.
Videotape your child doing these things. Bring it to the IEP saying, look, here's the proof positive. Students actually doing this. You guys have a different picture. Look at what he could do. Why can
Yeah.
I get him to do that at home and you can't get him to do it here? Where's the disconnect? And let's fix
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of the recordings. I think that, one of the things is this is what I do every week as a mom of a child with an IEP. I do my Team Drake email, and it goes out to everyone that's involved in his care. It's the school, it's the doctor, it's our neurologist, it's our psychiatrist, I mean, everybody's on that
Mhm.
email. And if you don't want to receive that email, then you shouldn't be on my child's team.
Great point.
And
Great point.
so what I do is, these are the things that we did. These are the things that he's doing. These are the things that I've seen him uh, doing this weekend. And so when you put that out there and they see it, hopefully, if they're interested enough in your child, they can use that as something for them to use during the week, and expand on during, in the classroom or outside in PE or whatever, socializing or any of that. But I feel like that was one of the biggest things. It's like really stay in communication with the school and your providers, because a lot of people, they don't.
Yeah.
And when you don't, then what you're going to get in an IEP is that are those progress reports that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So you have to show interest. But
Absolutely. I think communication is very key because there usually students have some sort of outside providers, whether through insurance, regional
mhm,
center, so there's other agencies and professionals working with them. To have those people communicate with the school district could only be helpful,
mhm,
because we want consistency, especially with certain disabilities. Consistency is key.
yes.
So having them work on the same things, if it's, for example, speech and language therapy, if we're working
Mhm.
on different goals outside of school than what we're doing at school, the student is going to be like, well, what should I
Yes.
do?
Yes.
And approaches and strategies should be very aligned, so that
Mm-hmm.
the consistency, we will see that progress that much more. So I agree
Yeah.
with you. Having that open line of communication is key, because it can only be helpful. The goal
Mm-hmm.
is your students' progress, and if
Mm-hmm.
everybody's on board, then talking about it, being on the same page, could only be more helpful.
Yeah. Now, since you're here and you're an attorney, if these things are not happening, if progress is not being made, and they're not following the IEP, what are the legal options that we actually have when it comes to this? Like, what do
Um,
we do? What can we
yeah.
do?
I think the first thing to do is, in line and in the spirit with communication, is talk to the school district. Document
Mm-hmm.
everything. The
Yes.
days of just being able to, walk into school and talk to the person in the front of the office and express your concerns. Um, well, I don't even know if there was a time for that, but it definitely is over. Okay.
Yes.
You got to document everything. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there are concerns, make them specific, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
make them specific. Don't be vague, and say, look, these are what I'm worried about,
Mm-hmm.
and name them. What can we do about it? Let's have a meeting. I'm requesting a meeting. You request an IEP meeting within 30 days. You have it. Okay. You let them know that these are the concerns. School district, what are you going to do about it? Once you make requests, the school district has to answer you. They can't just leave it alone. And per the IDEA, it's through what's called a prior written notice, PWN. And the school district has 10 days to answer you formally through a letter. So whatever requests, whatever things that you are thinking are appropriate for your child, they need to answer them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If they say, well, look, no, we're not going to do that. We are the professionals, and we think that um, um, what we're offering meets the students' needs. Here's the reasons. They usually have to explain why we're drawing that conclusion. This is what we're going to do. And in
Mm-hmm.
that letter, they do advise, if you don't agree, you could file a due process complaint.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to calculate that, because either at one point, either you're going to file a complaint, or the district, they have rights too. They could file a complaint to defend whatever program that they're offering. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be your legal recourses if you're requesting something that the IEP doesn't have.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel that the IEP is appropriate for your student, everything's going well, but they're not implementing it, then what you could do there is a different process, and that is to file a compliance complaint with the California Department of Education, because what you're looking for is state intervention, saying, well, look, state, we have a good IEP, they're just not doing it. Here's a copy
Mm-hmm.
of it. Here's the violation. They're not implementing the services, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
and say, look, state, make an order for them to do it. They're out of
Mm-hmm.
compliance.
Yeah.
So those are the main vehicles that you could use to make sure that the IEP is meeting the child's needs.
Yeah. Have you seen, do the states actually reply? Do they intervene when the state complaint is made?
They do. They do. It
Okay.
takes a while,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And in the current political environment, it could take a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the lack of personnel. However, that they do. And it
Mm-hmm.
usually takes about 2 months is the problem. Okay.
Okay.
So that's the difficulty. It could take long, but they do respond, and they respond in writing, and it's a corrective order, and
Mm-hmm.
they do an investigation. They look to see what is the violation, what did the district do or did not do, and they'll either find, are you in compliance or are you not? If they're in
Mm-hmm.
compliance, they explain to the parents, hey, look, this is what we investigated, and this is what we found. And you
Mm-hmm.
could you could appeal that. But if they find that the district is out of compliance, they do a corrective order. They issue that and say, hey, look, you need to do this, because this is what the IEP says.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that some of this, it actually kind of leads into the next part of that I was going to ask about, which is compensatory services,
Yeah.
right? So once you find out that the IEP is not being followed or you made a state complaint, what's next?
Yeah. Well, compensatory services, with any legal matter,
Mm-hmm.
you file a lawsuit, you got to ask the court for something. You're asking for a remedy. And under, depending on what law you sued under, there are remedies that the law provides. Now, under IDEA, there typically isn't money damages. Okay, that look,
Mm-hmm.
you screwed up this bad, you owe this much money. What there typically is are equitable remedies, remedies that are in the spirit of fairness. Okay, so if the school district denied a student a FAPE, a free appropriate public education, then there's been some educational loss. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that compensatory education services is making up for that educational loss. Provide
Mm-hmm.
services above and beyond of what the IEP is offering to make up the time that you screwed up or you sat on your hands or you just didn't do the right thing. And
Mm-hmm.
it could be in the form of certain tutoring, certain reading programs, writing programs. If there was a denial of FAPE in speech and language, it could be services, occupational therapy, social
Mm-hmm.
skills. There is no exhaustive list. It is more in line with, look, because of what you didn't do, school district, student is now affected in this way. So you're going to have to make up for that loss. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
compensatory education services are.
Yeah. We had an ADR and we did get some compensatory services. This was before I had found you. But the interesting thing is that even with that, it still didn't help. So that's why we came to you, right? It was like, okay, you guys are just okay. What this is not working. He's not learning, and what are we doing? You're doing the same things over and over again without changing
Yeah.
the way. And so we got some. It didn't work, and then of course we ended up with you anyway, which is kind of sad to think about that. But you know, I I think that compensatory services can be a great thing. We just need to, as a parent, we just need to make sure that it's the right thing
Right.
for the
Yeah.
child,
And that
right?
goes back to, knowing what your students' needs are. Because
Yes.
if you're, providing a service just to provide, it's not going to do anything. But if it's going
Mm-hmm.
to remediate an area of need, now we're talking. Um,
Yes.
you know, so if it's, for example, a need in reading, make sure that the reading curriculum that is being implemented is really to affect change in whatever's getting in the way of your child reading proficiently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, we really, a lot of times I feel like parents, we have to become this expert in so many things so we can make sure that this is followed. And I think that, and I feel bad because there are so many families out there
Yeah,
that they're just kind of, yes, yes, where do I sign? Yes.
yeah,
And they could have, and unfortunately the school districts don't do they don't give everything that they can give to a child a lot of times, and that's really sad. And that's one thing that it really it saddens me to see some of the kiddos out there that are just going along, just
yeah.
moving
No,
along.
it
Yeah.
is. And, to your point of becoming an expert in so many areas, my joke with clients are, I went to law school and had contracts, constitutional law, that kind of thing. Never
Mm-hmm.
was there special ed law. They never taught us how to read IEPs. These are things that along the way, once you choose your area, for me, this
Mm-hmm.
is the only area of law I've ever practiced, is you have to learn, all these certain areas, psychology, a little bit of speech and language, occupational therapy, and what
Mm-hmm.
all that means. And I my advice is always, make it a little fun.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be arduous all the time, but learn a little bit of everything so that you know what your child's needs are, but really what's out there to help
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I you know, we as parents, we need to learn, we need to do this. And that's why kind of where I'm at right now. I'm doing these, the podcast. Like this is me trying to learn, and I learn every time I have somebody on the show, and we meet so many amazing people. But and this is me making it fun. I'm just letting you guys know. So I love doing this.
them. I know it's
All
great.
right. Okay, so I think that I have more questions, of course. I have a
Yeah.
lot of questions. So let's talk about IEEs, the independent evaluations. Can you talk to us what that means? When can we request it? What time, like in the process of the IEP, like when is this available? Why do they make it available, and how we do
Yes,
it?
yeah, there's a lot to IEEs. First of all, school districts have to, the whole process, even from eligibility moving forward, is driven by evaluations. Before a student is even eligible, the school district has to evaluate. And just to
Mm-hmm.
summarize very quickly, you request an evaluation, the district provides an assessment plan. They have 15 days from your request. You sign it, school district has 60 days to do the evaluation and hold an IEP meeting to review it. Okay. And so there are legal standards on what those evaluations should look like. They have to be sufficiently comprehensive. They have to
Mm-hmm.
evaluate in all areas of known or suspected needs. If we think there's an issue, the district should explore it with these evaluations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's certain there's components. There's record reviews. In other words, the examiner needs to review records. They need to do interviews, interview the teachers, service providers,
Mm-hmm.
parents. There's informal measures, testing that they could do, but there's also formal testing measures that they could do that are nationally normed. In other words, it comes with the testing manual, and the examiner needs to adhere to how the test is supposed to be administered within the manual. So
Mm-hmm.
there's all these components that go with an evaluation. If the district does not comport with those standards, is when the evaluation could be deemed faulty. And then at that
Mm-hmm.
time, you can say, look, district, respectfully, I don't think you adhere to this point. You didn't interview me, or you didn't do a record review, or you only administered half of that instrument, and
Mm-hmm.
you didn't do a good job. And as a result, it affected the conclusions and the findings. So therefore,
Mm-hmm.
I'm requesting an independent evaluation, which really is kind of like a second opinion. You know, I want you to pay for somebody else to take a look at this outside, independent of the school district, and then we're going to review that evaluation. And it should be at your cost because you should have evaluated appropriately to begin with. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of key things I just want to point out is
Sure.
that you have to make sure that the evaluation was properly conducted. You can't just not agree with the conclusions. And I think that's where some parents get into some challenges is they don't
Mm-hmm.
like the conclusions. They request an independent evaluation. And what I said before about the PWNs, the prior written notices, once you
Mm-hmm.
request something, the school district has to respond. And in that PWN, that prior written notice, I've seen it happen too many times that they say, well, look, we did this in this evaluation. It is appropriate. So we stand by it. We deny your request for an IEE. And if you don't withdraw it, we're going to file against you to defend our assessment. And then, we get these calls all the time. It's like, oh my gosh, I got this complaint and I think I'm getting sued. What do I do? So I say that not to uh, um, get you nervous, but to impress upon you to really look at the evaluation and make sure, was it done correctly. Don't focus so much on the conclusions. I know that's where you want to go, which I get it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can add to it. Go look, and that's why I don't agree with it. But
Mm-hmm.
what I would suggest is just look it up on the internet, on whatever you look at to look for information. What are the standards of a school district evaluation? And
Mm-hmm.
then compare, did the district do these things? So then you
Mm-hmm.
can specifically say, yeah, I'm requesting this because I don't agree. Here's why I don't agree. And here's where you screwed up.
Yeah. I we got an IE because the the parent interview that they said that we had was a one-page questionnaire that I received from the school
Mhm.
district. Nobody called me, nobody asked me, we had no conversations, and it was just this one page uh, questions that I received from the school psychologist, and we were able to get the IEE.
Yeah.
Um, Still in the IEE environment, if I can say it
Sure.
that way. Um, do you? So they always provide you a list
Yeah.
of their people, right? Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the list means, well, I'm going to speak in general terms, but the
Mm-hmm.
list means is that the school district has contracts with those individuals. The evaluation, the IEE, the district can apply their SELPA standards, okay, special education, local planning area. This is like
Okay.
a world of acronyms, right?
Yes.
We say it
You're
like
swimming in them.
like the word SELPA. Don't you know what SELPA means? Come on.
Yeah.
So it's a special education local planning area, which is the regional uh, um, um, uh, local planning area of school
Mm-hmm.
districts. Okay, depending on each
Where
school
you
district
are. Yeah.
what their SELPA is. So there's guidelines that they can say, look, we're going to give you this IEE, but they have to adhere to these guidelines. So the school district could have a list of people that have already adhered, they're responsible for those guidelines, and there's a financial agreement with them. Like, if
Mm-hmm.
we use you, how much are you going to charge us? And that there's an understanding. Okay, and so there's some ideas that, well, I never want to use those people because they obviously have to be on the side of the district because the district's offering them. And
Mm-hmm.
that could be, but it's not necessarily. I really look at the who, and I know that I'm at an advantage here. I usually know who these experts are,
Yes.
and I've worked with them in the past. So I
Mm-hmm.
go with their character and integrity and see what kind of work they do. So
Yes.
if they're on the list and I know who they are and I trust their work, that actually is a benefit for me because the district has already used them and there's already an open contract so that,
Mm-hmm.
we could move that quicker. But you're not bound by it, okay? And school district kind of, use that influence on parents that, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
here's all we use, and the parent goes, okay, well, I choose this person. I don't know who else to choose. And it doesn't have to be. You could do your own due diligence and find people, say, well, I've spoken to so and so. They worked with your school district in the past, and they worked with these school districts. Here's who I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking for,
Yeah.
and you could bring somebody to the table.
Yeah. I my the person that we went to for Drake's IEE years ago, she has truly become a friend because she knows Drake inside and out. The amount of time that she spent with him during his assessment, after his assessment, like to this day, I still call her for questions every once in a while
Yeah,
about his educational plan and all of that. And she's amazing. And so really, and we didn't go. She wasn't through the school. She was not on the school list, but the one thing that we kind of ran into was the problem with the contract, right? Because if you go outside of the ones that they give you, they're probably going to charge more, and so you have to they would have to agree to the price, and it gets very complicated. But we figured it out.
Yeah.
But these IEE, it made a humongous difference for Drake. She saw Drake in a different light
Yeah.
than what the school district was looking and trying to make us see.
You get a qualified, talented expert to come in and do their, and when I say magic, I mean that in the terms that they do things that you didn't know were available and around, and they come up with ideas. They bring a heightened level of expertise to the case. It can make all the difference in the world. I'll give you an example that I use a lot. I had a case years ago, and it was a student that had a superior IQ. This kid was brilliant, just had a lot of behavioral issues. Okay, school district wanted to place him in a behavioral-based special day class where the students were not even close to his level, so he'd be bored, right? The argument was that because the behavior, we can't, we've had AIDS, we've had these things. What do you expect us to do? Which, to a certain degree, is a legitimate question. What do you expect us to do? And so what we did there is that we brought in an extremely talented board-certified behavioral analysis, a BCBA. And she did nothing short from magic. She evaluated him. She figured out what is really triggering these behaviors in this environment, developed a plan, a real plan on how to intervene. And when I mean intervene is get involved before the escalation, because if it escalates, I mean, that's it. You're not going to get them until it's done, right? So the key was, and this is where I learned this, that's the importance of the antecedents, is intervene at that moment so you don't have the behavioral escalation. And not only did she develop the plan, she trained everybody, and before you knew it,
amazing.
She left. She left the case because everybody was properly trained. Student at the time was like around in third grade, so this started first grade. We finally figured out in third grade. By the time we went to middle school, there's no more behaviors. There's no more.
Isn't it incredible?
Yeah, and that's why I use the term magic, because she brought to this case something that they just couldn't unlock, and she unlocked it. And so that's I use that example because that's such an easy example to look at. Getting the right people is key.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. So I wanted to ask about due process, because I feel like we can, as parents, we can use it as a threatening thing. Oh, we're going to take you to my lawyer, or however, we want to say it as parents. But really, can you explain that process? Because it's not an easy process. It's not the best, the best thing to do if you don't have to go down that road. But tell us what that road looks like, and what it looks for the parents. What should we expect if we do go down that?
Yeah. It's interesting because we grow up watching legal shows or movies. So we have an idea of what a lawsuit looks like, in court, the dramatics and all that, which I love. I just watched Devil's Advocate with Keanu Reeves and
oh my gosh, that's such a great movie,
and I love it. So I love those movies. But it's not always so dramatic that way. But in all honesty, it is a lawsuit. When you file due process, you're challenging the appropriateness of what the district's offering you. Okay, and so This is federal law. And so what the feds do is they don't want everything in their federal courts. So they establish administrative processes. That's not just in education, it's in immigration, it's in employment, it's in Social Security. And so our court right now is the Office of Administrative Hearings. And what are the way it works is that the California Department of Education has to contract with a certain agency to hear these cases. And for, let me see, since 2004, I believe, it's been the Office of Administrative Hearings. It used to be another agency before that. And they're the courts. They're administrative law judge. They're well versed in the law. And so once you file, the ultimate thing you're requesting due process. What you're requesting is a hearing. You're requesting a hearing before a judge to say, hey, judge, they didn't do their job. Give me an order to fix it. Okay. But there's a lot of layers before that. Once you file your complaint, by law, there is what's called the resolution session. The law said, look, within 15 days, hold a meeting and see if you can resolve this. Okay. Which is really a settlement conference. One side is being, it's the parents, district. Hey, these are my complaints. This is what I'm asking for. Can we settle this? If that doesn't work, then the next stage is, next formal stage is a mediation. Okay, and that is like the resolution session, a settlement conference, but an administrative law judge is running the meeting. Now, they're not running the meeting as a judge. In other words, they don't have decision-making power, but they're there to try to bring the sides to a resolution. If that doesn't work and the lines are drawn in the sand that we're moving forward to trial, then a due process hearing for all intents and purposes is a trial. It's what would be called a bench trial because there's no jury. Because we're dealing with kids, minors, it is one judge making the decision. They apply the law and you have to show your evidence. So there's testimony, there's documentary evidence, and you establish your case. What I advise parents, if you're gonna, because a lot of parents do it on their own, and that's phenomenal. I just say, my gosh, if you think you do,
oh my gosh,
it is tough because I'll tell you why. Because the district's going to get attorneys, and their attorneys are very smart. They're well versed. I deal with them constantly and have lots of respect for most of them. And so, they're going to have representation. So I would advise parents, if at all possible, get representation. Have somebody guide you through this. Ultimately, the parents make the decision unless it goes to hearing and the judge has to make it. But having an advocate or an attorney take you through this process to advocate for you, I think is key.
Yeah. I think that this kind of leads into what does an attorney actually do? What is this? Because in my mind, we came to you when I couldn't figure it out anymore. Yeah. I had tried the things that I knew how to try. And I think that a lot of times that's when you get the parents, even, when the shit hit the fan, right? Yeah. That's when you go and you get an attorney. So talk us through what you actually do when you get these and they come to you and the parents come to you. How do you lead the parents?
Yeah. And it could be different for, different offices. The culture of the office could be different, but I'll give you my point of view. I think that it's incumbent upon an attorney not only to be a legal advisor, but to understand a few things. Number one, we're not dealing with widgets here. We're dealing with kids.
Yes.
And as a parent, I know how I feel about my daughters. And, my joke with my clients is, I'm objective about everything except when it comes to my girls, my daughters. And I'd be the worst attorney because I'm dad. And so I don't see that objectivity. But that's my job is for parents not only to be a legal advisor, but to have a certain level of grace and compassion and understand that we're dealing with parents and we're dealing with kids and we're dealing with a family in crisis. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Hardly or never, if I'm going to be
Mm-hmm.
definitive, do parents call us because they're having a great time at school and they just want a
Yes.
second opinion. You know, usually they're in
Uh-huh.
crisis and something, like you said, the shit hit the fan. What
Yes.
do I do? So I think that to understand the subtleties there, the emotional subtleties there are just as important as having a well-versed knowledge of the law so that you could guide a parent. You got to know what you're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with here.
Yeah.
So I think that you got to do your due diligence. You got to review everything, the documents from the school, everywhere, to understand the student's needs. And
Mm-hmm.
then hear the parent side of it and go, okay, tell me what the problem is. And then say, well, look, I read everything and this is what I think that we could do. And it might not be everything that the parent wants, you know, and you know, I think, and you do it respectfully and you do it gently. And sometimes
Yes.
you have to say, you know what, I'm sorry, we just can't do that. But let me tell you
Yeah.
what I can do. I think that the law
Mm-hmm.
does is in our favor on these issues. These are the issues that I think that we could prove and that we can move forward. And let me tell you, if we achieve these, how I think it's going to help your child,
Mm-hmm.
and then just walk them through. I think that that's what an attorney does. Now, on the day-to-day things, we filed a complaint, we established the dates. One thing is, and I think that you would agree, I have the greatest staff, so they take care of a lot of things that I'm just not available to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a team here to handle the issue.
Yes.
So if there are letters to write, we do it. If there's motions to be drafted or to respond to, we do that. I think that, uh, again, if you want to get into this area of law, you do whatever you need to do to provide high quality legal and emotional assistance. Again, we're dealing with kids. We're not dealing with inanimate objects
Mm-hmm.
or contracts. Well, I guess we are dealing with that, but you know, at the heart of this is the best interest of a student, and
Yes.
so I think that approach is probably the most important.
Yeah. And I love it that you said you take care of the emotional part of the parents because I mean that's when when we're coming to you, we are completely emotionally in this.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember shaking at the last, the last couple of IEPs because I'm so angry, but I couldn't get my words out and I
Sure.
couldn't let them know exactly what was happening. And then
Yeah.
you come in and you say, hey, here's what the law says. This is what we can, and these are the things that we can't do.
Yeah.
And it's really looking. It's not for the parents, and this is one thing that I want the parents to hear. This is not for you. It's for your child. Like that's Edwin is coming in not as an attorney for you. He's gonna fix it for your kid. That's how I see this.
Yeah,
Is
and you know,
that
those have been some of the most difficult conversations I've had with clients is to say, hey, look, I understand why you're asking for that,
mm-hmm.
and it's not my opinion, but
Yes.
it's more, let me tell you why I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
And you know, again, have some grace because
Mm-hmm.
usually parents all they want is their children to thrive, right? It's usually
Yes.
not that they want above and beyond. They just want to have a great time at school, learn, and be a happy
Yes.
child. The
Mm-hmm.
issues are is they're usually not seeing that, and
Yes.
so yes, it is. I think the responsibility of an attorney to work with a certain level of compassion and passion
Mm-hmm.
to get the job done.
Awesome. Okay. I have two more questions, and then we can close this up. But one is, what can a parent do now, even though they might not be filing due process?
Yeah.
What should we be doing now?
And can you provide some specifics regarding
Yes.
How to
So what should
advocate or
no like just yes like what can a parent do now to prepare in case something happens? Because I feel like and I know that it wasn't on there, but I feel like if we don't get everything in writing, if we
yeah,
don't keep this together, if we don't do this, like I feel like we would make it so much harder for you to come in
yeah,
later on. Just I'm hearing these, I'm hearing that. I've talked to this person and I've talked to that person, but there's nothing in writing. Like, what
yeah.
can we do as parents to make this easier on you? Hopefully, we would never have to get to the
Sure,
point,
sure.
but yeah.
I think being proactive, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and that's very singular, but let's break that down, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that unfortunately, and it's not, and not by any intentional behavior, but I think that the calls that we receive, parents are being very reactive to certain
Mm-hmm.
things, okay?
Yeah.
So when I mean being proactive is this. Number one, have a copy of all educational records. Have the file at home, whether it is a physical copy or a digital, but have them, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that you could take a look at your child in a chronological perspective, from a chronological perspective. Year
Mm-hmm.
by year, what is the IEP working on? What's the level of progress? And so that you could have a wider lens of this is where they were, say, for instance, kindergarten. We're now in fifth grade. Yes, he's
Mm-hmm.
progressing here, or no, he's not progressing there. So, one is become well versed with your child's education and documents, have all educational records, put them in
Mm-hmm.
chronological order, and review them so that you understand where things are. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, nip things in the bud. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
if there's an issue, concern, problem, whatever, don't say, well, give it some time.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, let's write an email. This is happening. I'm seeing this. What are we going to do about it? If you don't
Mm-hmm.
get a substantial response, I'm requesting an IEP meeting to discuss this, this, and that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And just be on top of things.
Yeah.
For an annual IEP, number one, at the very least, review the last IEP so that
Mm-hmm.
when there is an accounting of where the goals were met, you could say, I agree because I videotaped him and he can do those things. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't agree. Press play and I'll show you he
Mm-hmm.
can't do that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if they go, well, you did it here, well, that's not good enough because then they're not generalizing these skills in other environments. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I would write, you had indicated a letter to the team. I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
great idea. Prior to an IEP, request all draft evaluations, request the draft IEP, read it and read it and
Mm-hmm.
read it until you understand it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say, look, have some draft goals. They're easy to construct nowadays. Just go online, you can figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And look at all areas that you want goals. And I would draft a letter that you're going to be at this IEP. These are the areas that you want goals. Here's just a couple
Mm-hmm.
of ideas. I want to talk about services. This is what I want to talk about, accommodations,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. Put the district on notice that this is your agenda at this meeting. So
Yes.
when they come with their agenda, go, great, I'm going to respect that. But here's mine. Because this
Mm-hmm.
really is my meeting. And I heard this podcast, and the guy said that I need to be an active participant and meaningful participation. So now I
Yes.
know. And so, I think that is what would be my advice to parents. Get in front of everything, be proactive,
Mm-hmm.
so that if there is a problem where you said, geez, I think I need an attorney. It didn't
Mm-hmm.
frustrate. It hasn't been years, and that you could really try to get the help that
Yeah.
your child needs as soon as possible.
Well, that was so good. I mean, you just told us parents what we need to do. And I think that it is so true. And I cannot thank you enough for spending all this time with me on here and with our listeners. And we might have to have you back at another time to ask more questions.
I'd love to. I had fun. I thought it was great. I hope it was.
Yes,
I hope the
it
listeners.
was great.
Yeah.
They're going to love it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, Edwin. We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone. See you next
All right.
week.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Before you go, take a deep breath. You don't have to solve everything today. You don't have to have it all figured out. If this episode helped you feel seen, grounded, or a little less alone, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future conversations. And if you ever want a deeper support, Special Education Concierge is here when you're ready. One step at a time, one decision at a time. You are your child's hero. I'll see you next time.